Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity, or Maidan, is a symbol of freedom, something that is impossible in Ruski Mir. And that's why they so much hate the Ukrainian ability to protect our dignity, our freedom, and our democracy. That's why they use millions of trolls all over the world who in various comments say, Maidan is the reason, Maidan is the problem. No, Maidan is the reaction to Russian imperial policy. But also Maidan is the end to Russian Empire. My name is Anna, and I vlog daily from Ukraine since the start of the brutal Russian invasion. And believe me, there are many reasons for this war, but the main one is Russian imperial character. And I'm happy to tell you more about one of the most important events in modern Ukrainian history. Subscribe to demonstrate your solidarity with my country and all democratic world. Maidan is a symbol of modern Ukraine, our revolution of dignity. And it is also a symbol of everything that Putin is afraid of. I am happy to be Ukrainian, a person for whom dignity means something. All these values that we often talk about in books, poems, and conversations, like freedom of speech, democracy, choice, and dignity, of course, are not just words for us. And it is very important that the large percent of ordinary citizens in Ukraine become extraordinary when they need to protect the democracy. Even looking back in our history, we can see these traits. For example, Ukrainian Cossacks. They were also a reaction to various political, economic, religious suppressions that our nation had to go through, and as a reaction they shaped a really strong army that later got its own state and power. Today, Russia often uses Maidan as an example of chaos as a reason for their invasion when it is just the country. Simply, Maidan is a symptom that normal democracy is possible in once Soviet republics. And this is what Kremlin is so much terrified with. As a Ukrainian and as a witness of two Maidans, actually one in 2004 and another in 2014, I am ready to share my observations that will definitely prove Maidan is not a coup and is not a reason for Russian invasion. It is just the country, the reaction to evil Putin's plan, and the thing that helped Ukraine not to become another silently annexed Belarus. Let me give you a brief excursion into our modern history after the renowned Ukrainian independence in 1991. The collapse of Soviet Union in 1991 resulted in one very serious problem that actually encoded millions of other problems later for many countries decades after its collapse. The main thing is that old communist elite remained in power, and many of the so-called new presidents of new republics were actually former heads of communist parties, like the one in Ukraine or the one in Russia. And these communist elites started to transform into criminal, economic, once again we cannot use the word elites, but shaping a new, extremely powerful class on many of ex-Soviet territories, the class of oligarchs. Traditionally, oligarchs never care about their countries, they don't know what their country is. They care about resources and how they can dig money out of poor people and nations, and especially their resources. Russia is known for that dig and sell economy, but it spread its influence on the former republics, and thus needed to influence political agenda in these countries. Ukraine was always freedom-loving. You remember our Kiev Rus history or Cossack times. The same happened in the 90s, and we tried shaping our own way using the examples of our European friends who were actually very close to us culturally and in mentality. But Russia did not want to lose the resources of Ukraine and started interfering into Ukrainian politics. Another extremely important symptom, signal, feature of Ukrainian revolutions is that they are always anti-Russian. Every Ukrainian Maidan, in 1991, before the independence, in 2004 and in 2014, was the reaction when we did not want to join the Ruski Mir. And it's not just about the culture and language, it is also about the attitudes inside the society. Maidans are always against authoritarian rule and disrespect to human dignity and freedom. So, in 2000, Russia started interfering into Ukrainian internal politics and slowly started shaping pro-Russian government. And the peak of such attitudes resulted in falsified elections, huge sums of money put into Ukrainian presidential campaign, and an extremely awful pro-Russian, if not to say just Russian president, Yanukovych. Yanukovych himself was a pathetic figure. His IQ was really low and he demonstrated it not stop. He could not speak Ukrainian well and he had 2 criminal convictions. One for joining a criminal gang and another one for stealing a fur hat. You know how we associate them with Soviet Union. But his criminal past, his low IQ, inability to speak the language of the nation you rule, and even his inadequate first lady was not the main problem. The main problem was that Yanukovych sold or gave everything to Russia. He was actively helping Russians get our oil system, gas system, electricity, all the energy infrastructure, selling it to Russian oligarchs, violating all national laws, and also letting Russian Black Sea Navy remain in the Crimea for as long as they want. Foreign military navy in the independent country. Processes in Ukraine in, let's say, 2012 remained very similar to the Belarus ones. Plants, energy infrastructure all belonged to Russia, and the process of Russification seemed peaceful. Though they invested billions of dollars in in Russian culture and Russian language inside Ukraine. For example, in 1 year, they could have spent $1 billion on the support of Russian cultural projects and Russian linguistic projects in Ukraine. Every concert, every TV show, films and series were always dubbed into Russian instead of Ukrainian because, well, you understand it. Now, just imagine, before the start of Revolution of Dignity, the Minister of Defense in Ukraine, the head of police in Ukraine, SBU service, and even the Minister of Education in Ukraine were all Russian citizens. Russian citizens in the independent Ukraine are ministers. So please never repeat Russian propaganda narratives that say that Maidan was a coup. What happened before Maidan was actually a coup against independent Ukraine and the desire to annex it silently, just as they successfully did, unfortunately, with Belarus. The plan was that Yanukovych continues the eternal dictator of very dependent Ukrainian state, gives all the resources, all the infrastructure to Russian oligarchs, follows the advice of Putin and pretends to be a president. And Ukrainians? Well, Ukrainians accept that, just as Russians do, or Belarus people do. Also, serious attacks were targeted on democratic NGOs, various programs that were open here to help Ukraine strengthen its Euro integration reforms. Because once again, Ukrainian society, quite active civil society, was always pro-European. And even in our constitution, we have a special article which declares Ukrainian development in the way to European integration and NATO. Please accept us. Remember that. It's important. We fight for that with our lives. During short periods when democratic Ukrainian governments operated inside the country, some preparatory work for the EU integration of Ukraine was made. And together with our EU partners, the association agreement was prepared. And Yanukovych was delegated by Ukrainian people to sign this association agreement. But Putin told him not to. And quite unexpectedly for all the Ukrainian country, he said, "I will not sign the agreement." That was huge, both for Ukrainian people who delegated him to sign it, and also for our EU partners who have never been in such a situation when everything was ready and the president says, "No, we want to join Ruski Mir." And that is exactly the moment when Revolution of Dignity, at the beginning known as Maidan, began. It was the reaction of Ukrainian citizens to the improper behavior of their president. All the society voted for the reforms and signing of association with the EU, and he, just because of his personal dependence on so-called President Putin, disagreed to sign it. At the very beginning of this episode, I have reminded you that for Ukrainians, freedom and dignity matter a lot. These are not just words. And for centuries, we are known for good self-organization. And people started coming to Maidans in different cities all over Ukraine and, of course, in the heart of Ukraine, Kyiv. The protests grew bigger and bigger, and the more power against the citizen was used by pro-Russian government, the more people came to Maidan. This is how we react to suppressions, contrary to Russians who simply escape or just film how their activists are arrested. When Ukrainian activists were taken to Avtozaks, all the other people around started shaking these Avtozaks to free their brothers and sisters. And Russians, no, they cannot do it because it's dangerous. But on Maidan it was also dangerous, and now we have heavenly 100 people who were killed during the protests on Maidan by Ukrainian and Russian special forces invited there by the so-called President Yanukovych. Russia always underestimates Ukraine and the strength and influence of our society. And after the start of Maidan protests, neither Yanukovych nor Putin knew what to do in this situation. So very quickly, Putin started sending Russian military and Russian police services to Ukraine. Mass shootings began, fights on Maidan. People heroically died for the protection of their motherland, and Yanukovych realized he needs to escape. One more fact that proves he was a totally created by Russia figure. He escaped to, yes, Russia. He escaped to Russia. Using this very difficult moment in modern Ukrainian history, Russia began its war. When millions of Ukrainians mourn the victims of this brave revolution, when we think about those who joined the Heavenly 100 and we start rebuilding the country, Putin enters Crimea with his green people. Well, actually, at this moment, they still pretend not to be Russian. But also, you remember that during the rule of Yanukovych, they got all the access they need to Crimean military bases, and they made it full of Russian military men. So literally we may say that Crimea was annexed even before the start of Maidan. Ukraine was reshaping its new government. Yanukovych escaped. We did not have a president at that moment. Ukrainian army was really weak. Once again, because of decades of Russian interference into Ukrainian military affairs and active demilitarization of Ukraine, inspired by Russia but also blessed by the Western world, who felt it's easier to speak with Russia than with smaller countries. That is a big mistake. But our army was quite weak at that moment, and Russia decided to act. Breaking all international agreements, annexing Crimea, Russia demonstrated its true face. And the world demonstrated its true face too when advised Ukraine not to escalate. This is the worst advice you can give to a victim when facing a bully. But we were advised not to escalate, and Russia used it as a green light to continue its special military operations to the south and east of Ukraine. Today, Crimea is used by Russians as a huge military base from which they supply their troops on the front lines with everything they need. Luckily, we are able to destroy their air defense. We have drowned a big half of their navy, and I'm sure Crimea will soon return back to Ukraine, but this is vital. And please, people all around the world and global leaders, don't you ever doubt Crimea belongs to Ukraine and it will return to Ukraine. Please, never repeat Russian messages that Maidan was the reason for the war. It was Russian desire to annex Ukraine that resulted in a beautiful revolution of dignity. Putin often gives medals to his soldiers, and one of these medals has an inscription for the liberation of Crimea on the 22nd of February 2014. So we have to remember, repeat and explain to people all over the world that modern Russian war against Ukraine started in 2014 and continues for 10 years already. Russia must be stopped and punished for us to be able to live again in a normal and safe world. Remember to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and helping film videos like that. But most importantly, thank you for standing with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!